Thank you for tuning in to Circling Dialogos and my riffing and probing and wrestling with Heidegger's basic questions of philosophy. Thank you again for tuning in. I hope this moment finds you well. I hope I hope that the future is calling you towards it, and you're calling it to you in such a way that is bringing you joy and deep truth. And speaking of truth, this is precisely what we're going into with Heidegger. You know, if we think about truth, right? Truth is something like our means of connecting with reality, right? Think about it. Like every moment of every day, you're continually adjusting, planning, retracing your steps, taking the next step based on some semblance of truth of what's the correct or most true thing to do, right? What's the truth of your situation, right? On some level, like you think about it, like how deeply truth is involved in the micro and the macro at every single moment of your life. On some level, you're watching this, right? This video right now, because on some level, you think that there's some truth here, right? More insight. And with more insight, we can see deeper into reality. The more reality we can see, the better our actions and our behaviors can correlate with that. I mean, truth is all the way down, it's in between, it's above, it's below, it's like weaved into the deepest weave of the fabric of our being. So therefore, right, our understanding of truth, right, is such a radical, deep thing for us. And so as we're going into truth here, and we're looking at the history of truth and making our way through our current understanding of truth, which, as Heidegger's been talking about, has been correctness or correlation between mind and object. That what we're finding is that what's being revealed here is that essentially that understanding has been groundless up until now. Its ground, if you can call it a ground, has been the tradition of understanding truth as correctness for a few thousand years. And so much so that it becomes uh, ridiculous to even ask the question of truth, right? Because it's so self-evident or so clear. Yet, a few videos ago, when we went into it, one of the things that was revealed is Heidegger started to ask the question, right? Well, what presupposes, right, the mind and the object being able to represent it, right, and then represent it for other people? Like what is it, what makes that even possible in the first place? And he said that, well, you know at some very deep level, it presupposes that the world is open to the observer or to the person in such a way that the person is corollarily open to the object or to the world, and that the dimension, right, between the two is open for such a thing like representation to become possible. And there's an openness to other human beings to be able to speak about the truth and point to it and co-represent it. That there's a fourfold openness, right, that presupposes and holds sway through all of our representations, all of our correctness, and that openness has been concealed in its obviousness. And so he's now kind of lifting this out of the tradition, right? And looking at like lifting up the tradition and revealing its ground, right? We can now start to inquire into this, whatever this openness is, this fourfold openness, but I think we can start to understand now that in a very deep way, truth isn't something we perform or we do exactly, but it seems that more truth, and we can start to understand this with the openness, that truth is something that we participate in. We participate in the openness of truth. And this openness presupposes our ability to participate. And it seems that there's also something about this openness that calls us, right, to participate in it. All right. So let's continue. Okay. So section 11 here, Heidegger goes on. The question of truth as a question of the essence of the true, not an inquiry into the universal concept of the true. To raise the question of truth can mean, 1, to seek the true, 2, to delimit the essence of everything true. It is easy to discover which of these two ways of raising the question of truth is the more urgent and more important one. Obviously, it is the search for the true, and above all, in the sense of the true that rules and decides everything. The comparison, it appears that the question of truth, i.e., the essence of the true, is something merely supplementary, nay, even superfluous, flowous, however you say that. For the essence in the sense of the universal, which applies in each case to the many particulars, as e.g. the universal representation house applies to all real and possible houses. This universal is grasped and formulated in a concept. To think the mere concept of something is precisely to abstract from particular realities. Thus, if we desire the true and seek it, we will not strive for truth in the sense of the mere concept, to which anything true as true is subordinated. When we seek the true, we want to gain possession of that upon which our historical humanity is posited, and by which it is thoroughly dominated, and through which it is raised above itself. Every genuine attitude of man who dwells in the real and wants to transform what is real, remove it from its place and liberate it to higher possibilities, will arrive at the univocal demand that can be expressed briefly as follows. We desire what is true. Why should we be concerned with truth itself? So basically he's saying, like, why waste any time looking at the essence of truth, right? The abstract concept of truth, and just seek the true, right? Why bother with this essence, right? Because apparently the most important thing is the truth. So the truth of your life, the truth of your problems, the truth of your goals, the truth of all this kind of stuff. Like, why bother with this universal concept of what is true? That's what I hear him saying or questioning. But insofar as we are here inquiring philosophically, and philosophy is the knowledge of the essence of things, we already have decided otherwise. In philosophizing, we reflect on the essence of the true. We abide by that which is precisely not a concern for ones who desire the true, and hence they who desire the true must reject our intention as something extrinsic and useless. It was not in vain, but rather in anticipation of this rejection of our proposal, that at the very outset, we said philosophy is immediately useless knowledge. Our reflection on correctness and on truth itself can accomplish nothing towards the correct solution of economic difficulties or towards the correct improvement and assurance of the health of the public health, nor can it contribute anything to the correct increase of the speed of airplanes or to the correct improvement of radio reception, and likewise just as little to the correct design of instructional projects in the schools. With regard to all these urgent matters of daily life, philosophy fails. Nay, even more, because it inquires only into the essence of truth and does not determine individual truths, philosophy will not be able to settle anything about the decisively true. Philosophy is immediately useless knowledge, and yet still something else, sovereign knowledge. If that is so, the knowledge of the essence of the true, i.e., knowledge of the truth, could perhaps still bear a significance, and even one that reaches beyond everything useful. But how is the essence, as a universal concept, supposed to acquire a sovereign rank? What is more shadowy and therefore more impotent than a mere concept? So again, he's continues to lay the groundwork for the validity of the philosophical questioning of truth, right? And I think we can, as I was talking about earlier, it's our understanding, right, of truth that informs and guides how we find the true. So on one level, if something else is decided about truth, right, in its essence, that begins to translate how and what truth occurs for us in our daily lives. He goes on. In this regard, a question still remains, one that is perhaps most immediately connected to the question of truth as the question of the essence of truth. We have determined the essence sufficiently in identifying it with the concept. Perhaps the essence of the true, hence truth itself, is not grasped at all if we merely represent in general that which applies universally to everything true as such. Perhaps the essence of the true, hence truth itself, is not what applies indifferently with regard to the true, but is the most essential truth. In that case, the genuine and decisive truth upon which everything must be posited would be precisely this essence of the truth itself. In that case, the standpoint which pretends to care so much about reality, well, we desire the true. Why should we be concerned with truth itself? Unquote. Would be a great error, the error of errors, and up to now, the most enduring of all errors. Supposing truth is this truth, then our inquiry into true as the question of the essence of all truths, provided we carry it out correctly, will not be mere play with empty concepts. So in other words, okay, let's see if we can grasp this. So if 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 the essence of true, right? If so what we're trying to gain here, right, is a grasp into the essence of truth. And that essence, right, is what guides and determines all particular truths. If that essence is untrue, right? It seems, in other words, I think what he's saying is the most important particular truth is truth as such, right? If we get that one wrong, we're kind of like epically fucked. All right. Section 12. The question of the legitimacy of the ordinary determination of truth as point of departure for a return to the ground of the possibility of correctness. The fact that we are immediately leaving behind the customary concept of truth and are trying to attain the ground upon which the determination of truth as correctness is founded shows that we are not entangled in an empty squabble about the mere definition of the concept of truth, but that we want to touch something essential. Through such a return to the ground, to what is worthy of questioning, we put into question the determination of truth hitherto, and in so doing, make ourselves free of it. But do we really make ourselves free? Are we not binding ourselves all the more to this essential definition to such an extent that it becomes the obligatory one? Again, he keeps questioning the legitimacy, right? In layer upon layer of continually coming back and reminding, represencing the legitimacy of the question, right? Is this the right question? Is the question valid? Why is it valid? He just keeps harping on that. He goes on, let us not deceive ourselves. With the return to that openness by which all correctness first becomes possible, we in fact presuppose that the determination of truth as correctness has indeed its own legitimacy. Is this then already proved? The characterization of truth as correctness could very well be an error. At any rate, up to now, it has not been shown that this characterization is not an error. But if the conception of truth as correctness is an error, what then about the positing of the ground of the possibility of correctness? To say the least, such a positing can, in that case, not claim to grasp the essence of truth more fundamentally. On the contrary, we must concede that what supports an error and founds it is a fatori erroneous. What is the meaning of the return to the manifold unitary openness if it is not proven in advance that what we take to be the point of departure for the return, namely the ordinary determination of truth as correctness, has its own justification? Now, in fact, the concept of truth as correctness is confirmed through a long tradition. But the appeal to tradition is not yet a foundation and safeguard of the truth of an intuition. For centuries, the tradition clung to the opinion that the sun revolves around the earth, and the eyes themselves even confirmed it. Nevertheless, this opinion could be shaken. Perhaps the traditional character of an insight is even an objection against its correctness. Is it not possible that what might in itself be an error can become a truth by being believed long enough? Whatever may be the case here, the mere long duration and venerable character of a tradition are not by themselves a reliable ground to prove the truth of an essential determination. So basically, he's in some sense, I think he's presencing truth as correctness has up until now no ground, or the ground has been hidden, right? So I think he's asking the question, what if what we're taking to be true, i.e. correctness, is itself wrong? Then what does that say about us looking for the ground of the wrong, of this wrong truth about truth, right? If truth isn't correctness, right? Why would we then look for the ground of it? But I think then he's saying that, well, it already has a ground or something that functions like the ground called tradition. And it's the habit and the sway of that tradition that in some senses served as the ground of correctness, so much so that it becomes self-evident and obvious. That's what I'm getting out of this so far. But, he goes on, but we must appeal to a traditional, but must we appeal to traditional opinions in order to ascertain the legitimacy of the determination of truth as correctness? After all, we can form for ourselves a judgment about this legitimacy. And that is not difficult, for the characterization of truth as the correspondence of a representation with an object is self-evident. This obviousness has the advantage that it is relieved from further foundation. What we call the obvious is what is clearly evident on its own without further thought. Now, to be sure, it has been shown conclusively enough that if we take truth as correctness of representation, we in fact avoid further thought, and that here something is evident for us because we are renouncing every attempt to elucidate it more closely and more genuinely. What kind of obviousness is this, however, which subsists on cutting off of every intention to understand and on an avoidance of every questioning about the ground. Can such an obviousness pass as a substitute for a foundation? No. For what is obvious in the genuine sense is only what by itself precludes further inquiry as impossible, in such a way that thereby clarity reigns concerning the intelligibility of obviousness. So again, up until now, right, the self-evidence of truth as correctness, of representation to the world, and that correlation has been so obvious, and it's been holding sway for so long that it is in some sense kind of served as, for all matter, it serves a function as a kind of ground in a certain sense, in which Heidegger is questioning and trying to, in some sense, loosen its grip. And in loosening its grip, right, we can start to fold it back and see what's underneath it. But it's really tricky, again, because, again, we are, as he's been really driving home throughout the book so far, right, is that what is most concealed from us is what is most near to us, right? So getting this, you can kind of feel these hermeneutic circles where we're trying to, like, in some sense, circle back into, trying to see our own eyeball in a certain sense. And those eyes, you could say, is the eyes of the tradition, right? The tradition that makes truth to occur as self-evident, right? That tradition operates in a very concealed manner, right? Because in some sense, it's our understandings of truth, right, that give us our way of perceiving that has it occur in the way that it does. So seeing those structures, right, of occurring, if you will, is what we keep circling around to try to get try to get into and see what is what's concealed in its obvious, what's concealed in its nearness, right? Because the greatest mysteries are not what is out beyond the stars, right? But it's what's closer to us than ourselves. That is the mystery and the site of mystery. Okay, section 13, the foundation of the traditional concept of truth in the return to its origins. Only one way still remains for us to arrive at a foundation of the traditional concept of truth as correctness. We will investigate the origin of this tradition and examine how this determination of truth was grounded when it was first established, namely in the philosophy of Aristotle. If we turn back there, our reflection also gains the advantage of being able to. Oh, that was strange. Zoom just shut off here. Okay. Let's start here from the top. Only one way still remains for us to arrive at a foundation of the traditional concept of truth as correctness. We will investigate the origin of this tradition and examine how this determination of truth was grounded when it was first established, namely in the philosophy of Aristotle. If we turn back there, our reflection also gains the advantage of being able to bring to the inner eyes in its primordial originality and purity, the conception of truth that has been veiled ever since. Hence, we are suddenly confronted with the task of a historiographical consideration of the theory of truth and judgment in Aristotle, whose philosophy stems from the 4th century before Christ. Now, if we view this historiographical task in the larger and proper perspective of our question, we will become disconcerted. For the decisive intention of our questioning is precisely to free us from the past, not because it is past, but because it is groundless. We want to raise questions on the basis of our own present and future necessities. Instead of that, we are now preparing to lose ourselves in a historiographical consideration of the past. That must signify a reunification and a flight in the face of what is needed, namely to ask questions ourselves, to ask questions ourselves instead of merely reporting the opinions of bygone ages. It seems that such a historiographical consideration acts against our own intention. Therefore, we need a clarification of the foundational issues, especially with reference to the further course of our lectures. Okay, so this is setting us up. This paragraph is basically setting us up, I believe, for going deep into the distinction between the historiographical and the truly historical. All right, so let's just jump into it. So the historiographical consideration of the past. Entering into history is perhaps not always and necessarily such a flight in face of the task of the present. It is certainly possible to consider the past from the viewpoints and according to the standards of the living present. In doing so, the past is loosened from its frozen state and is related to the present and made contemporary. Such a consideration of the past becomes a veritable reconnaissance of it. For that is the very meaning of the word historiography. Greek word that means to explore. To us, therefore, historiography means an exploration of the past from the perspective of the present. This perspective can thereby become self-evident and standard. For example, Rank, in conscious opposition to the presumed historical constructions of Hegel, believes he is presenting the past just as it was, yet definite guidelines of interpretation are directing him to. It is just that these are other than the Hegelian. Conversely, the standards may be taken from the present and applied expressly as such, and then the past is explicitly made contemporary. these two sorts of historiographical considerations are not basically distinct. Okay, so I mean, I'm hearing that so historiography is looking at the past from the present, which makes it contemporary. And that you constantly hear this with historians of saying like, no, you got it wrong to other historians, right? And there are these arguments about um, history as being the correct factual, right, linear um, calculations and ordering of events that actually happened in the past. And historiographic looks back there without noticing that they have a view in looking at at history, and that their view shapes what is seen. But often, I guess, with historiography, they think that it's a matter of objectivity, and that there was such a thing as the past, right? And that if you observe it clearly, right, you can get it right, as if the way that you're observing, right, has no bearing on the matter. However, he's raising this point with Hegel view of history and this other guy, right? Um, they're both historiographical in that sense, but they disagree, right? Um, in 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 what their disagreement is based on, right, is not the objectivity of history as being more accurate, one being more accurate over the other, but the way that they're approaching history, right, is affords its the way it discloses, right? So it's actually the view that they're coming from. That's historiography, I guess. Goes on. To be sure, a question remains. If the standards and guidelines of a historiographical consideration are taken expressly or not from what is then the present, it thereby already decided that these standards are sufficient to grasp the past? The fact that a present is present and what is current is today does not guarantee that the present standards correspond to what may be the greatness of a past and are commensurable with it. Indeed, every past can be presented as timely for an age. This is the source of the confusion of all historiographical considerations. But it could also be that a present is as frozen as the past, and the standards of the present are merely bad residues of the past, no longer understood. It could be that a present is altogether caught up in itself and therefore precisely closed and shut off against what the past has to say. The mere relating of the past to what is currently present can attain new results, and even does so necessarily, for a present is always different than the previous one. But these new historiographical results, which intoxicate people and make them think themselves superior in relation to earlier historiographical science, are also already antiquated before they become truly new, because the present soon again turns into an other, and timeliness is most inconsistent. Therefore, all historiographical considerations are snares. Let's see, anything to be said about this? No, I think that basically, I don't think I could say it any other way. So B, the historical reflection of the future as the beginning of all happenings. But a historiographical consideration does not exhaust the possible relation to history. So far from doing so, it actually impedes such a relation and cuts it off. So historiographic, in the way that it comports history, right, actually cuts us off from history, is what he's saying. He goes on, we are calling historical reflection, what we are calling historical reflection is essentially different from a historiographical consideration. Okay, here he's making this distinction between historiography and truly historical. If we consciously elaborate the distinction between the historiographical and the historical, even linguistically, and adhere to it over and against the ordinary confusion of the two terms, then this precision in the use of words is founded on a basic attitude of thought. The word historical means happening. History itself as a being. Historiographical refers to a kind of cognition. We will not speak of historical consideration, but reflection. For reflection is looking for the meaning of a happening, the meaning of history. Meaning refers here to the open region of goals, standards, impulses, decisive possibilities, and powers. All these belong essentially to happening. Okay, I want to go back to this part. So this seems really important. The word historical means happening. This part, history itself as a being, right? Whereas the other one, historiographic, refers to a kind of cognition. So what is the difference between turning back and looking at history? God, my Zoom keeps turning off here. Sorry about that. I'll end it here after a couple of words about this. But the truly historical, right, sees history as a being, right? So in other words, I think when you think about history being a being, right, we can listen to a history. There's something inexhaustible, right, about its being. So we can listen closer and closer, and it can continue to reveal itself to us. But if we take history in the historiographical sense, we turn history into like an object to analyze, right? Thus, it's about cognition, right? It's not about meaning. It's about surveillance and calculation, right? And accuracy and all that kind of stuff. So it, just like with the person, I guess, if you look at a person as an it, right? You can measure the person, you can quantify them in all these different ways. There's all these ways of calculating who a person is, but that calculation isn't going to have you know the person, right? Know the person, right, is that through line gathering all of these aspects, right? But isn't itself another aspect, right? That through line right? We need to listen to, we need to have a relationship with. So it's really, I guess, so far what I'm getting is the difference between the historical and the historiographical, right, is something like an I it versus an I thou relation. So seeing history as a thou, interesting, isn't it? All right, it's midnight. It's actually 2 minutes past midnight for me. Guy's gonna go nighty night. Thank you for tuning in.